Is technology good? Is it bad? Is it evil? Is it fine as long as we use it correctly? These are all the questions that people have when we talk about technology, and we've been asking these questions for a long time, especially if you've read science fiction or even watched all the pop science fiction movies of the last 30 years, 40 years. You have some real sense that there are dangers with technology and that there are ways of approaching technology that are not good and that are downright, perhaps, apocalyptic in their implications or executions. And these questions are becoming increasingly more prevalent today with the advancements in fields like AI and robotics, which will be the next thing, I'm sure. So the questions become increasingly more pertinent and people want to talk about them more, but I think we talk about them in the wrong way. We ask these questions like, is technology good or is technology bad? And those are questions that don't really have answers because they're not good questions. And it leads to kind of all these arguments that don't really go anywhere. People want to say, well, you know, it depends on how you use it, which is a very utilitarian, outcome-based thinking, which is, I don't think that's a very good question either. It's, you know, well, this particular technology is good, this particular technology is bad. Well, look at all the results. Are they good? Are they bad? Etc. These kinds of questions range from, I think, meaningless to of highly limited usefulness. And so what I wanted to do in this brand new series, we're going to do 6 parts on technology, and we will try to answer questions similar to these that I hope are more productive. But what I want to do, especially in this first episode, is to contextualize the conversation around technology so that we get a sense of why we are asking these questions and what we are asking, actually, the deep roots of what we're asking. So how do I want to contextualize this? I want to contextualize it in this bigger question, which is, how do we understand our relationship to technology and, more broadly, to knowledge? So, in other words, we have to look at an imaginative framework for how we ask and think about these questions. How do we contextualize this? What is our imaginative framework to understand correctly or most accurately what our relationship to technology is as a species? And to do that, I want to start with the beginning, with the Garden of Eden. So when we look at Eden, I think it's very important to appreciate that the Eden situation is not perfect. Eden is not this perfect reality, and then there's the fall, and now we have to somehow attain back to Eden, and Christ's salvation is to, put us back where we were originally. And what do I mean by not perfect? So perfect, I'm going to get you with words here. Perfect is a Latin word. It means complete. So it's understood when you read the writings of the church fathers that Adam's situation in the Garden of Eden is an incomplete situation. Man himself is understood to be incomplete. He's immature because he was just created. So I'm going to read you a quote from Irenaeus in his text Against Heresies, in which he says the following: Could not God have exhibited man as perfect from the beginning? Let him know that, he's, doing the rhetorical thing. Let him know that inasmuch as God is indeed always the same and unbegotten as respects himself, all things are possible in him. God can do anything. But created things must be inferior to him who created them, from the very fact of their later origin. For it was not possible for things recently created to have been uncreated. In other words, because Adam was just made, he's obviously not an uncreated thing that existed eternally. He came into being. But inasmuch as they are not uncreated, for this very reason do they come short of perfect. Because as these things are of a later date, so are they infantile. So are they accustomed to and unexercised in perfect discipline. For as it certainly is in the power of a mother to give strong food for her infant, but she does not do so, as the child is not able to receive more substantial nourishment, so also it was possible for God himself to have made man perfect from the first, but man could not receive this perfection, being as yet an infant. So, in other words, God could have made man perfect from the beginning, but man was immature. He was just created. He's infantile. He's an infant. This is the words of St. Irenaeus. And man could not therefore have received the perfection if God tried to make him perfect. So, and why that is, maybe we can get into later. But he says this, unaccustomed to and unexercised in perfect discipline. So actually, the teaching of the Holy Fathers is that man is not made perfect and then falls from that perfection and has to be restored to it. That's very much a later kind of Protestant, different types of Protestants had this idea. The idea was that we were immature and not prepared for all these things. Our discipline was not perfected. Our virtues, presumably, were not perfected, but that doesn't mean we were in sin. You see, mankind can be imperfect and not able to attain to perfection without having done anything wrong. Because remember, in Orthodoxy, we don't think about things only in terms of did you do something wrong or not. And if you didn't do something wrong, then you're fine. I mean, that's kind of a Western legalistic conception of salvation and sin. I'm oversimplifying, yes, but generally speaking. Okay, so given this state in Eden, you have Adam and Eve. They are not mature. They're infants. So now what? Well, now God places in the garden two trees, as you know, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So what do we say about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Because now we're trying to understand man's connection to knowledge, his relationship to knowledge and then to technology. So this is from St. John Damascus. He talks about the tree in these terms. He says, hence it was named the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because to those who partook of it was given power to know their own nature. Now, this is a good thing for those who are mature, but an evil thing for the immature and those whose appetites are too strong, being like solid food to tender babes still in need of milk. This is from the Fount of Knowledge. Same language here. Now, John of Damascus obviously coming much, much later than St. Irenaeus, but we see the same continuity of the patristic language here. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he says, it gives them power to know their own nature. Now that's quite a powerful thing, to know the nature of something. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends. What does he say? He says, it's good for those who are mature, but an evil thing for those who are immature. And of course, what did we just hear from St. Irenaeus? That mankind is immature. And so the implication, I think, is that when God says don't eat of this tree, he's not saying knowledge is bad. This is a lot of people like to talk about, skeptics who want to criticize Christianity. They want to talk about it in terms of people are, the church is against knowledge and it's against science and it's part of this whole myth of progress thing, Dark Ages mythology that we talked about in the first series. You see, the church hates it when people have knowledge. It's built into the religion. No, not so. It's that the issue is maturity. The issue is not knowledge. And so the implication here, as I was saying, is that there's this kind of fasting period where the thing is forbidden because mankind is immature. And there needs to be this period for spiritual growth. And I think that means, I think this is in the Father somewhere. I wasn't able to find it, but someone tell me if you know where this is. But I believe I read somewhere that one of the saints talks about it in terms of a fast being imposed and then The implication being that we were going to get to eat of this tree when we were ready for it. And again, I don't have an exact citation here. I'm misremembering, but that implication is obviously here, right? Because if man's immature, and then he needs to take time to grow spiritually, and the reason that the tree is forbidden is because mankind is immature, and it's a good thing to eat if you're mature, then I think that implication follows, that we would get to eat of this tree when we had reached a point of spiritual maturity in which it would be good for us rather than evil, which is what St. John says here. So knowledge is good. I mean, that's not the problem. The problem is who has the knowledge and how mature are they? And you all know this very basic stuff at an intuitive level if you're around children at all, right? You don't give a toddler a knife. I have a knife over here on my desk, a nice big kind of hunting knife. I'm not giving it to my toddler. Is it because knives are bad? No, it's because she's a toddler. She's not ready for it. And so this is very basic. And if you recontextualize the Eden story through this lens, then you get a better sense of what the fathers think about our relationship to knowledge. It's not that they think knowledge is bad or evil. The church is against knowledge or science or anything like that. It's that the church is worried about us being immature. And so what happens in the fall? You know what happens. We eat the fruit anyway. And this is much bigger than just breaking some kind of a moral commandment. God said no, and you disobeyed. I mean, that gets trotted out all the time in all of these kinds of Christian circles in the West as that's the problem. And that kind of reduces God to this sort of tyrannical, do what I say, or I'm going to, give you a beating kind of thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's for our own good, just like I wouldn't give a knife to my toddler. And so then what do you get after that? Well, you get it being man who is not mature but now has knowledge of natures and his nature. That's why they realize that they're naked. That's part of it. I mean, there's a lot going on in Genesis, but that's part of it. So then you have humanity, flash forward, and we haven't necessarily matured that much spiritually, but we have stuff like nuclear weapons. To me, mankind, fallen man with nukes, is kind of like the toddler with the knife. We have great power. So knowledge, yes, knowledge gives power, but that's not the problem. The problem is the maturity. How mature are you? I can have a big knife because I'm a grown-up and I know what to do with it and what not to do with it, and my toddler does not. So remember what the serpent says. He says, you shall be as gods. Because Eve tells him, no, we're going to die if we do that. And he says, you will not die, which is a lie. But he says, you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. In other words, you will know the moral nature of reality. And that's supposed to be, perhaps, implication, the end-all, be-all here. No, it's okay. You'll be fine because then you will know reality. And that will somehow give you the power and maturity that you need. But mere knowledge doesn't give you maturity. You all know that. And so instead what happens, I think, is that there is a transition, and I've talked about this in my book a little bit, from God being the source of all life and truth to mankind trying to be his own source of life and truth, which is, of course, leads to death. The analogy I use in the book is you unplug a power strip from the wall and plug it into itself. It's like, the power strip can be its own power source. Then you plug it in, and of course, that's what makes all the power turn off. If you've read my book, then you know this analogy. And so what that means from a truth and knowledge perspective, perhaps, is that we are trying to become our own arbiters for knowledge and for morality itself. So in other words, morality goes from something that's outside of us, that's independent of us, to something inside of us, something that we become the arbiters of. You shall be as gods. You shall know the truth. And maybe you shall, in other words, dictate what the truth is. So it becomes self-centered. Because otherwise, in a normal state, there's the truth. It's outside of you. It's something that you can submit yourself to and be in accordance with or out of alignment with. But if you become as gods, then truth is something inside of you. It's something you say what it is. It becomes this fiat thing. And this is very concerning, because if we become the moral arbiters for reality, but we are spiritually immature, then we have a big problem. We have a big problem. So, where does this go, therefore? So I want to talk about something that's a little complicated, maybe a little abstract, but it's a term that I want to introduce that to you guys. It's called the dark logos. This is what I'm going to call it. Now, there's some other philosophers who talk about the dark logos in terms of like Dionysian versus Apollonian, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm talking about. If you know about that, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm using this term in a different way. So what do I mean by the dark logos? Well, let's start with what the logos is. So the logos is this word that you may know. It means a word. It's often translated as word in Greek, from Greek to English. And it's most famous probably in the preface to the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, etc. And the word there, of course, is logos in the Greek, in the original Greek. Now, what does logos mean? It's often translated the word, but that's not enough to talk about what these wonderful, untranslatable Greek words mean. Logos has all sorts of connotations in Greek, and you may recognize it from the word logic in English. It's where we get it. So it means logic. It means something like reason. It means something like unifying principle. It's the rational ordering of things, sort of the internal order of the cosmic rationality and order that governs the world. And the ancient Greeks had this concept of the logos before Christians were on the scene at all. Heraclitus famously talks about the logos. And then many have argued, there's this wonderful book called Christ the Eternal Tao. And it argues that the concept of the Tao in Taoism, Chinese Taoism, is basically the same, the way Lao Tzu talks about it, as the concept of the logos. And so what is this idea? It's the idea that there's this thing, the way, the truth, all things Christ talks about as himself, of course, that is at the fundamental root of what gives reality its cosmic rational order and structure and being. It's the unifying principle of reality. And so Christ is the logos. That's the Christian claim, because many of these other religions arguably believed in something like the logos. And Christ is the logos. That's what we say. By him all things were made. So he is the logos, and then all things are made through him, because all things have this rational order to them. And where does that rational order come from? This is something that would have been an obvious question to ancient people. And so this has a lot of implications for what's going on with our relationship to knowledge. So let me jump around a little bit to Genesis. Prior to the fall, God talks about creating man in his own image. I think this is really interesting. That means a lot of things. There's a lot of things you could say about it. I want to focus on one of them, not exhaustively, but just one of them, which is that it has something to do with being like God in the capacity of being a creator. So let me give you this quote here from Genesis chapter 1. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God made man in his image, in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Then God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And notably, God creates the Garden of Eden, and he places Adam in the garden to what? To cultivate it. This is in Genesis chapter 2. Then the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. This gets translated different ways. I see it sometimes as cultivate. And so nothing's happened yet in terms of the cosmic fall. That's the big deal in Genesis that everybody's stressed out about. But prior to the fall, there's things that happen. There's work that needs to be done. Adam is placed in the garden to cultivate the garden. So a garden, if you've done any gardening, you know that it's something you have to keep up with, right? You have to pull out weeds, you have to trim things down if you want them to grow a certain way, and there's all this style that you can do it. You can do to your garden. You don't have to just let everything grow crazy. You can have things grow in a certain way. You can trim plants so that they grow into certain shapes. There's a lot of artistic freedom and style that you can do into, and you can put into doing something like a garden. And you're working with nature, you're cultivating nature. And this is part of this whole have dominion over everything in the world that's going on. So, what does this mean? Well, I think that this is a way that man is in the image of God because we're asked to participate in something that God does, which is creation. Now, obviously, we don't create ex nihilo, meaning out of nothing. Man does not have that power. Nobody has that power. Only God creates out of nothing. But we kind of subcreate or co-create. Subcreate is the word that Tolkien uses. He's talking about storytelling. But these elements are there, is that God makes the world, and I think the implication is that he makes it incomplete. He makes it not quite finished. Literally, in Latin, imperfect. Just like man is imperfect. And so we're given to do something with it. Have dominion over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. Cultivate the garden. Cultivate yourselves. Be fruitful and multiply. Build mankind. And build the world up. And of course, prior to the fall, famously, Adam has work to do. So cultivating the garden and naming the animals. The animals are brought to Adam and he names them. So there's intellectual work to do as well. So all of this is to say that what's going on with what it means to be a human has to do with stewarding creation. The fathers often call Adam the priest of creation. You cultivate creation, you steward creation, you continue, subcreate or co-create with God this work of forming the earth into something beautiful and good. And to do that at all, you have to participate in this thing that is the Logos. Because if the Logos is sort of the base code of all reality, if it's the rational principle undergirding everything, it's hard, you see how it's hard to talk about. It's like underneath the rational order of everything in the universe, of math and physics and all of these things that we take for granted as the laws of the universe or whatever, if all of them actually unfold out of the Logos and have their source in him, and if he is a person, if he is Christ, then to work with the world, to cultivate it as Adam and Eve do or are supposed to do, requires this kind of interaction with the Logos. You have to draw close to him and participate in the things that he has made, who are constantly being sustained and grown and cultivated by him as well. This is why it's co-creative. You see where we're going with this? Okay, so what then is going on with the dark Logos? I'm checking chat here. Hello. Alicia says hello. Did they already know the moral nature before she ate the fruit? Luke is asking this. It says Luke the theologian, but I'm concerned that that's not actually St. Luke. Anyway, did they know the moral nature? According to the fathers, no. According to this citation, at least, they don't know what the moral nature of things is until they eat it. Now, are they able to know it when they actually, do they know it fully and completely? We'll come back to that. Rational ordering principle of the cosmos, or that which gives account, equals the Logos. Yeah, I like this phrasing. You see how it's difficult to kind of get an exact phrasing for these things, because it's not just that the word is mystically Greek untranslatable word. Greeks are like, well, you can't translate it. It's Greek, And yeah, that's true. But part of the problem is that you're dealing with very old words that have been used in different ways by Greek philosophers over literally thousands of years in different contexts. And so when St. John is writing the gospel and he picks this word logos, he's intentionally and deliberately playing on the whole history of Greek philosophy behind these things. I think so, at least. And so that's why it's a little hard to translate. But I think you're getting a sense of this, is that it is this kind of rational ordering principle. It's the thing that gives things beingness and coherence. Because reality doesn't just manifest to you as like a bunch of sensations and blobs and flashing lights and stuff. When you look around, it has an ordering. I mean, sometimes it does if you open a door, a bunch of stuff falls on you, right? But I jest. When you look around, you see things and they have a rational order to them. A good example is there's these things called the laws of identity or the laws of logic among philosophers. One of them is the law of identity, and it states A is A, meaning a thing is what it is. I have a wall here behind me. It's not changing color randomly. There's books over here and there, and they're not suddenly becoming fish and then changing back. We don't really live in a world of actual chaos at a baseline logical level. At a baseline logical level, things have form and being and order to them. And all the ancient thinkers understood this, and they realized that that was itself something that needed explanation. Why do things have a rational order to them? Why are things intelligible to us consistently? In other words, this is kind of the presupposition behind doing science at all. You do science with the expectation that objects don't randomly change into objects. I'm going to do this experiment, and I believe as an assumption that this pear tree I'm experimenting on is not going to become an orca or a manta ray briefly for 4 seconds while I'm doing the experiment. That would make no sense. That would be an irrational kind of universe. Hopefully you're getting a sense of this. Okay, so dark logos. What's going on with the dark logos? We will talk about that when we come back from break. How do you explain the sacraments? It's easy to say they're mysteries that we have to take on faith or on the authority of tradition, but that is not how the early Christians understood them. To them, and to all ancient people, the idea that physical objects had spiritual power was very intuitive, whereas modern people tend to find this difficult, bizarre, or even unchristian. This is because we live in an era shaped by secularism, a way of viewing the world that's incompatible with sacramental thinking. Because secular ideas are at the heart of our culture, modern people tend to think in secular ways without realizing it, even the most well-meaning of us. How then do we live in, but not be of, a secular culture? We need to understand the enchanted, sacramental way that the early Christians viewed the world, but we also need to understand secularism. What is it really? Where did it come from? And how does it influence how we think about religion? Journey to Reality, Sacramental Life in a Secular Age breaks down these important issues in accessible, non-academic language and is an ideal introduction for young readers, catechumens, and seekers, as well as for any Orthodox Christians who want to deepen their understanding of the sacraments.
Journey to Reality, Sacramental Life in a Secular Age by Zachary Porcu. Now available at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Welcome back. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out about the Substack. I'm starting to upload a bunch of guest lectures that I've been doing. Sometimes I go to churches and I give catechetical type lectures, and I'm a catechist at my parish. Many of you know this. And I've been doing kind of long form catechetical lectures for the catechumens, and I'm starting to put those up. They're like an hour each. There's going to be 3 of them. They're up on the Substack. They're free. Check them out. If you like Journey to Reality, or want to know if you would like Journey to Reality, they're up there. The first one's up. I'm going to put the next one up next week. And we also do all kinds of other stuff on the Substack. And if you are interested, you want more of a voice in what I do and say, and you want to poke at me to talk about certain things, that's where you want to go. And we're also doing a launch special sale. It's like almost 60% off, basically. And it's been running all of Paschaltide, and today is the last day of the sale. So if you want like 58% off or whatever, then go to the sale page. We're going to put a link in the description or in the comments. Check that out after the show. And yeah, happy Pentecost, everyone. Okay, so back to this dark logos business. Let's see. We have a little Neoplatonism discussion in the comments, which is always fun. There are different people who are starting to bring in these ideas about Aristotle and Neoplatonism kind of back to people's attention, which I've been appreciating, because we've kind of dispensed with a lot of these questions that the old guys, Aristotle and the boys, as I always say, they asked all these questions, and then the modern scientific movement said, well, we've moved beyond that because Aristotle's physics was wrong or something, so we don't need all that. But now that we're coming up into these real problems like AI, we have to ask questions like, okay, well, what is a person? How are we supposed to distinguish a person from AI? That's an important question. And so people are finding out that maybe we should go back to read some of the early guys and see what they had to say, because they're making distinctions that we have dismissed or refused to make or don't know what's being made. Somebody in the chat is saying that John Vervaeke, who's one of these people, he's been on Pajot's shows, and he's been getting around talking a lot about AI and this kind of stuff. He says John Vervaeke even calls the logos the through line of things, if that's helpful for people to understand it. And that's Kitsune in the comments there. Thank you. And if that helps you, it's a through line. Like there has to be a unifying principle, something that runs through everything and unifies it, orients it, makes it work at a very basic level. Okay, so we have this situation. Excuse me. God creates the world. Christ is the Logos, by whom all things were made. In that, he creates man. Man says, all right, I'm going to cultivate the garden. I'm going to name the animals. I'm going to have dominion over the world. And there's this co-creative element to that. So in an ideal situation, man is sort of looking up, or, the Logos is within you, whatever. He has a relationship to the Logos that's a thing that's outside of him, Christ the Logos, the second person of the Trinity. And by this orientation, becoming spiritually mature, he's able to shape the world in accordance with truth and beauty and goodness, and make a beautiful, wonderful world. And so his knowledge of the Logos and learning the natures of things is used to do this very thing, to make the world beautiful and good. Now, of course, the problem is we eat the knowledge before we're spiritually mature. So now mankind has this situation where we're spiritually immature, yet we have the knowledge of nature. So what are you going to do if you're spiritually mature and you have freedom and power and knowledge of things? Well, you're going to get into trouble, and welcome to Earth. We have sin. We just spent the last entire series talking about the secular states and of course, by implication, all the horrors of the world wars in the 20th century. That's one answer to what we do with knowledge without spiritual maturity. Okay, so what is the dark logos there for? Well, the way I'm using the term is that, or the way I'd like to invite you to use the term with me, is that the dark logos is what happens, it's kind of this fake logos that we make. It's the logos, it's an artificial logos that we make in our position as being detached from Christ. So the fall disconnects us from God. In the language that I use in my book, we're unplugged from the arche. And then it's just us with this knowledge, this kind of evil knowledge almost. And it's not evil. I mean, knowledge is good. It's darkened. That's why I want to call it the dark logos. And so when we are gods, according to what the serpent said, and we conceive of ourselves as gods, then we have this problem because we do have dominion over the earth. That hasn't changed. I mean, you look outside, we've conquered the whole planet, more or less. And we're trying to conquer it more all the time. Now so we still have that power to shape creation, but we're shaping it in our capacity as being fallen, meaning we're disconnected and disoriented from he who is the logos of all reality. And instead we're building this artificial thing, this dark logos that has this spirit to it. I don't know how I want to define it, but we're going to keep talking about it over the course of this series. And maybe by the end of it, you'll get kind of more of a sense of what I'm saying, because you can kind of feel it. It's weird. We'll get into it later. So the dark logos is you might define it for now as our knowledge, but crippled by our immaturity at best, but really darkened by our appetites at worst. So we're going to talk about more about this in part 3, but C.S. Lewis mentions in his famous essay, The Abolition of Man, that part of the problem with knowledge is that if there's no higher moral order to seek after in obtaining that knowledge, or to direct it towards, or you get it from the Logos, Christ, then knowledge just becomes this tool. For what? Well, if you don't have a conception of a higher moral order, and you're disconnected from God and the good, then what are you going to use that knowledge for? And his answer is to fulfill your appetites, to seek pleasure, to give you what you want, as opposed to what is good. So this is kind of where the dark logos goes and where it leads us. Darkened knowledge in the service of the appetites, rather than oriented toward the good. Okay, so what does all of this mean, therefore, for our relationship to technology? And what I want to suggest to you is that this is our fundamental problem with technology, is that we are the toddler with the knife. Or worse, we're a toddler with a handgun or something like that. We don't have a knowledge problem. I mean, look around. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we don't know, or that we don't know very well, or that we could know better. But I don't think when I look at humanity that we have a knowledge problem. A lot of people say this. This was a huge part of like kind of liberal thinker talking points, Enlightenment thinker talking points for the last 400 or 500 years. That, well, if only we had more knowledge and better education and the correct methodologies, the ways of approaching the world, then we would solve our problems. It's a knowledge problem. People in the past had problems because they were ignorant. That's not what I see when I look at the world. I don't see mankind as a creature with a knowledge problem. I think we have a maturity problem. We have too much knowledge for the maturity that we have. Again, I'm upset that I have to say this all the time. It's not that knowledge is bad. Because people are like, well, you're saying knowledge is evil. Well, a knife is not bad unless, if a toddler has it, for example. There are many ways where it can be bad. So it's a personal problem. And I'm not saying, it's just a matter of how you use it. That's sort of trivially true. I'm saying that it's about who's using it. Do you trust the person? Is the person capable? Are they prepared to have the maturity to do it? I mean, we do things like we have the age of consent, and we have drinking ages, legal drinking ages, and we have ages for driving tests, and we give tests for driving and this kind of thing. Is that merely about knowledge? No. We know that the older you get, the more life experience you have, the more mature you are, then you have a better sense of how to deal with these things and how to handle yourself in the world. And so we understand that there are benchmarks for maturity. Now, are people more or less mature at 21 or 18 or whatever? Yes, of course. But you get the spirit behind this idea. So our problem isn't technological, therefore, either. It's not about this or that technology, and it's not about having the right method to use that technology, or about defining the right limits or the right circumstances, or here's the line and here's not the line, and if we just get this method figured out, then we'll be good. Then we will be able to perfectly handle technology. That's not the problem. The problem is spiritual. We are spiritually immature. Because, and here's the thought experiment, you can imagine a saint, scientist, technocrat, whatever, just like we could, in the last series we talked about this, you can imagine a ruler who was completely holy, who is a saint, who rules a country in a dictator-like system, who loves all his people because he's a saint and who does good by them. We can imagine that as Orthodox Christians because we believe in holiness. So in the same way, you can imagine somebody holy developing technology properly. And maybe there are certain types of technologies we shouldn't develop, like pornography websites, for example, or websites that are designed to make you an addict, like social media and TikTok and stuff like that, that specifically prey on the user's dopaminergic feedback cycles. It's like they psychologically prey on you to make you watch more videos. Okay, so maybe there are ways of developing technology that are bad. Yes, but we have this kind of techno-maximalist approach as modern people. We think, well, new technology is inherently good. It's new, it's cutting edge. Old stuff bad, new stuff good. And not all technologies should be developed. We'll talk more about that later. But what's the main way that you decide which ones are good and which ones are bad? Well, it's through discernment. It's through wisdom. It's through knowledge of the moral nature of reality. In other words, we require spiritual maturity. It's not enough to know the natures of physical things. You have to know the nature of morality. And so what we see, though, this is a problem. That all throughout human history, we don't do this. We do the opposite. We actually try to use technology to replace the spiritual all of the time. This is not a modern phenomenon either. This is something I'm going to say a lot, I imagine, as we go through this series, is that it's not just that in our particular times we've gone nuts with technology and this is horrible and, you know, in the 1920s we didn't have these problems. That's not true, first of all. But the extent to which it's kind of going off the rails is very obvious now. And I think that's why people are talking about it. But, you know, if you look at human history, you see that we have always been trying to make ourselves into gods with technique, with technology. And the example in Genesis, not too long after the fall, is the Tower of Babel. So what's going on with the Tower of Babel? And I want to suggest to you that the Tower of Babel is really about this desire to use technology to make ourselves into gods or to seize control of reality through technology, through technique. We're going to talk about this. But first, I'm going to give you a quote from Father Stephen DeYoung, who you may know if you are around the ancient faith stuff. I'm quoting from his book, Religion of the Apostles, which is a very good book, also published by Ancient Faith. And here's what he has to say about the Tower of Babel. He says, the Tower of Babel is actually a ziggurat, a step pyramid in the city of Babylon. And the building of this thing signified an attempt to erect a mountain of assembly by human effort, a way of drawing God down from heaven in order to manipulate and control him. The name Babylon and Babel is derived from the Akkadian Babelim, meaning the gate of the gods. So there's a lot going on in this quote. So let's start with this idea, though, mountain of assembly. So in this book and elsewhere, Father DeYoung talks about, there's this concept in ancient religions, ancient Near Eastern religions, of a mountain of assembly. So the Council of the Gods is imagery that we see all over just all ancient Near Eastern religion, Mediterranean, all this ancient religion. The gods are always coming together to have this council and to talk about things and to decide the fate of the earth and all this kind of stuff. And that's, you know, on Olympus, the Olympians gather on Mount Olympus and then they watch the Trojan War and decide what they're going to do or not. And this imagery is, of course, all over the Old Testament as well. The assembly of God happens most famously probably in Job, where all of the quote-unquote children of God come together, the assembly of the angels, of the gods, really, under, of course, the God of gods. And they have this conversation about Job, and you know the story of that. And the thing about this concept of this mountain of assembly is that there were mountains where the gods would come and meet, like Olympus. And ancient people, again, as I'm always saying, they didn't distinguish the physical and the spiritual world as these sort of discrete categories the way we do today. They thought that the physical and spiritual world had all this kind of overlap, including the physical geometry of the real world. So Olympus, if you don't know this, Olympus is a real mountain in Greece. And there are shrines and all this kind of stuff there from the ancient world. And what's going on? So therefore, where is the mountain of assembly for the God of gods? And it moves around. That's what Father Jiang will tell you. It moves around, and that's why the throne of God is often depicted as a chariot in the Old Testament. This is an observation he makes. Anyway, why am I talking about all this? Because the mountains of assembly are these high places that have a physical height, but also understood spiritual meaning as being spiritually elevated, in fact. And that's where the gods meet, and they decide things, and they rule from the high mountain of assembly. It's a place of rule. So why does this matter for Babel? Because Babel is not just like a tower, like, I don't know. When I grew up, I heard this story, and I thought it was a tower like the Eiffel Tower or the Tower of Pisa or the Empire State Building or something. That's not what it was. It was a ziggurat. In other words, a pyramid. So what's a pyramid or a ziggurat? It's a stepped pyramid, a ziggurat, and it goes up like this. And what a pyramid is a mountain. It's an artificial mountain made through technology. And the reason that you make this artificial mountain is because you want to create something like a mountain of assembly, a high place to worship on which to offer sacrifices on the top. And to get the attention of the gods, to go up into the realm of the gods, which is obviously up high in the sky. And that's where you would find these sacred mountains. But we can make our own sacred mountain with technology. So an artificial high place. And when we do that act, what we're saying is, irrespective of the physical and sacred geometry or geography overlap of the actual conditions of the world, we're going to build our own mountain of assembly in a ritual way that's going to give us power to control the gods, or at least petition them. Well, what that means is that we're controlling fate with techne. Now, let me say a little bit about this other Greek word, techne. It's where we get the word technology from, and technical and technique. It's a way that you manipulate something. So there's a way of manipulating matter, that's a techne, that we're going to use for various purposes. In this case, to build this mountain of assembly. So maybe you're starting to get the picture here, is that the dark logos is this effort to manipulate matter according to the knowledge that we have of matter, toward the purpose of ruling the world in a way that's for us and not in accordance with the moral reality of the universe. In other words, instead of connecting ourselves and seeking through humility and spiritual growth connection with the true Logos, who is Christ, and then walking with him, knowing how to order creation in a beautiful and good way, we reject the Logos and we create the dark Logos artificially, and we do things like artificially build a mountain of assembly in order that we may be as gods and we might control the world through force, through power, through technique, through pure knowledge. Knowledge without moral orientation. So going back to this Father de Jong quote, he says, that Babel was an attempt to erect a mountain of assembly by human effort, a way of drawing God down from heaven in order to manipulate and control him. So this was the arrogance of the Babel thing. That's why God had to come and break it up. We thought that by using technique, techne, we could actually grab hold of and subdue the God of the gods. We could actually conquer the logos with our own power, with the dark logos, as it were. So that's why God scatters it, because he says, this can't happen. They can't do that. And he just, bing. So bye-bye that. And where does this go? This is very interesting. And one of the things that happens is that when the languages are scattered, because you know the story, God scatters the people by dividing their tongues. Well, there's some symbolic meaning to this. There's another passage in Deuteronomy where God assigns, he takes all the different people groups that were all united to do this wicked act, and he scatters them apart and divides them by language, meaning they turn into different cultures. And Father DeYoung argues, and many other people point this out, that when God divides the nations in this way, he actually assigns them all to different lesser gods. He gives each one of them an angel to rule over them. And this is where we get into our second big important bit of context for how we interact with technology. One is we are fallen, but here's the other problem with our relationship to knowledge and to technology. The gods fell too, didn't you know? We're going to talk about this next week. Which is the fall of the gods and our constant interaction with them, which is often over knowledge, in fact, and power, and the power that comes from knowledge and who is ruling who. So I have another quote here from Father DeYoung, same book. He says, "Here, Babylon is explained as the capital of a world empire in which a grand ziggurat was being built, a structure intended to stretch up to heaven and bring God down so that he could be coerced into serving man. In response, God did indeed descend, but only to drive them away, confusing their languages and separating them." This is what I was talking about. This event is further recounted in Deuteronomy, which affirms that God assigned the various nations to the sons of God. The nations of the world began to worship these angelic beings as gods and became enslaved to them. This is what we're going to talk about on the next episode. Let me jump into chat, because I see you are all commenting. Harry says, the kind of Luddite, quote, all technology is evil, seems to be a spiritually immature position as well. Yes, and the reason is, if a kid was like, if I told a kid, hey, you can't watch R-rated movies because you're 10, or, and the kid was like, I guess I can't watch movies. I shouldn't watch any movies because I could see something I shouldn't see. And I need to protect myself from that at all costs. It's like, I can watch movies because I'm a grown-up, and if something comes on that's not good, I'm like, hey, that's not good. And then I turn it off because I don't want to watch this. And that's because I'm mature, right? It's not going to bother me that much. But a 10-year-old, not so much. So he might say, oh, I have to not watch anything. And that, yeah, like you're saying, that is a spiritually immature position. So we can't just reject everything. I understand why people want to. Trust me, I'm there with you. But that's not the way forward. Somebody else says, Naval Orange Gazer here says, yes, but wearing a tinfoil hat to keep the Bluetooth Wi-Fi out and calling Thomas Edison a witch, unironically, is so much fun. Well, there are a lot of positions that people have about things, and I'm not convinced that all of them are wrong. Like, I kind of think there's truth in everything. Maybe you've gotten a sense of that. What's going on with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi? I don't know. It's low-level radiation. Is that bad? Maybe. I mean, I would believe it if it was. Is it probably fine? I'd probably believe that too. So I don't know. But Was Thomas Edison a witch? That's a cool question in that it conflates science and the occult, which we're going to talk about soon, he says. Okay, here we have DEV. In the Old Testament, a mountain is a tabernacle, is a temple, the holy place where rule is established and royal court happens for the divine. Yes, it's so important to appreciate the symbolism that people would be familiar with in the ancient world, which is these high places, tabernacles, temples. There are places that are holy, and we build them in view of certain moral and spiritual realities in order to participate in the divine. I talk about this in my book in the chapter about what's going on with the liturgy, because God shows Moses the cosmic liturgy, and then he tells him, you have to make the temple in this exact way, the tabernacle. And if you do that, by imitating it, you'll be able to participate in it. Because ancient people thought that imitation was participation. I think we know this too, but we don't have the vocabulary for it. So if you imitate something, you're able to participate in it. Not just pretend. It's not just symbolic. It's a way of participating. And then from this holy place, that's sort of what legitimizes the royal court, the seat of ruling, which is always linked to the divine. It has to be, because there's a moral order to the universe. That means there's rule to the universe. That's what orders it. Let's see here. Here we have, if I recall, techne is kind of like art in the ancient sense. It fits together, which to my mind brings the image of puzzle pieces. Yeah, art is, so ars is a Roman word, means art, and techne is a Greek word, which we talked about. But there, I think you can translate one to the other in a lot of contexts. Like the idea of an art or an art form, it's something that you make, it's something that you're doing with techne. I think that would have been understood across the Greco-Roman mind, not in every case, of course, but you're dealing with this idea that matter can be manipulated according to certain forms, certain ideas of how we manipulate matter and produce new things or discover new interactions with things. Maybe that's where your puzzle piece kind of imagery comes in. Because if you can discover things in matter by messing with it, and you discover principles or dynamics or interactions, then what you're really saying is that there is a logos to reality that's independent of you, that can be discovered by inquiry. Let's see here. Yes, the issue with technology is the purpose. I find the best way to discern whether our use of technology is worth it or not is asking the question, to what end? Yes, we have to look at the end for which it's aimed, but this is the point that I think even when people say that, they miss this. A lot of people I talk to, by end and by purpose and aim, we can't merely be talking about how many units of production we were able to make. How efficient was this? Oh, can we make enough of these things? Can we solve this problem? Can we solve that problem? Not merely in a utilitarian way, in other words. Ends have to be moral. This is what Aristotle would tell you if he was here. The ultimate end is the good. And Aristotle talks about this. He says, things are always for something else. If you want to learn to cook, the aim of learning to cook is to know how to cook. And then the aim of cooking a meal is to feed people. And the aim of feeding people is so that people are healthy and can prosper. And he says, you can keep doing this. You can keep saying that everything is for the end of something else until you reach this point where you have to stop. And what you say, well, it's just good. It's good for no other thing than for itself. And when you find that thing, that's the good. And the good is the ultimate thing that everything is aimed at, even for a pagan like Aristotle. These ideas were not new to Christianity, although Christianity has new takes on them, of course. And so yes, I like what you're saying here, but what I want to say to lots of secular people is you can't ignore the question about morality, about the moral aims of things. That's what the ultimate purpose is. And we're probably going to talk about this in episode 3 when we talk a little bit about Lewis's take on this, C.S. Lewis, which is that what are we doing? And if it's just for meeting various worldly goals, that's still not an ultimate end. The ultimate end is always moral. And this is another problem with AI, since some of you are talking about AI right now. It's not clear. We can make AI do all sorts of things, but can it do things in view of a truly moral end or a truly moral conception of reality? I'm not seeing it. Let's just put it that way. Okay. I am going to stop here. Next week, we are going to, what is next week's episode called? The Fall of the Gods. We are going to talk about the gods and how the gods are real and how they've interfered with history in all sorts of ways and how they have come and brought knowledge to mankind, and that our relationship to knowledge in general can't really be contextualized spiritually, I think, apart from also having this context of who the gods are and what our history as a species has been interacting with them. So, thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to the rest of this series. This has been, as always, a listener and viewer supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio, and I will see you on the other side.